They were complaining about some of their team members not adapting to any kind of changes because they used to say, oh, we've always done this way. This is the worst AI will ever be.
Leslie has spent the last few months speaking directly with business owners, trying to understand one thing: what happens when AI changes faster than companies can adapt? Today, he breaks down why AI may completely reshape the way businesses operate and why most people still underestimate how fast this change is happening.
It's usually the elephant in the room. Everyone in the room, they see the problem, but it's never in the room because it's always in their heads. Business owners and leaders, they're facing problems everywhere. Everyone likes to have clarity because tomorrow, next month, in the end of the year, it's going to be so much better. Last month, I've heard one sentence that made me rethink about AI. The person said, "This is the worst AI will ever be." And what that person meant is that we may blame AI for not being perfect, for hallucinating, for doing things half baked. But if you think about it, it's kind of like the worst it is because tomorrow, next month, in the end of the year, it's going to be so much better. And we've seen this happening in the past 2-3 years where things went, right? And what I did in the past month was I had my own event. I had to go to another event, and I ended up talking to at least 30 business owners, some of them with multiple companies. And the recurring thing that happened was that every single one of them, they were talking about AI. And the constant thing that they talked about was how can we improve these workflows and how can we scale? But most importantly, the thing that I've heard a lot is that they were complaining about some of their team members not adapting to any kind of changes because they used to say, oh, we've always done this way. And that was so revealing. And when my partner and I, we did an event about AI, and we presented some of the things that we're doing internally for our own companies, the companies within our group. And but before we showed some of these things, we actually started asking the business owners about their problems, places where they thought there was a bottleneck, someone not performing well or overloaded, most importantly. And we started discussing these and we started drawing the workflow in front of them. This is an exercise that people don't usually do it, but it's so empowering because once you draw a workflow, everyone in that room will see exactly the same thing, because the recurring thing is that everyone has an idea of how one process in the company works, but it's really uncommon to everyone to see exactly the same workflow because they exist in someone's minds, or each one of them, they have the different drawing in their own heads. But once we start asking questions and we start drawing, people say, no, it's not like this. There is an extra step that happens before in here, that we talk to John, and then John does something, and then they realize that they don't actually know what John does. Or they say, oh, I don't know, Maria has a spreadsheet that does something in here that does the calculation. And then we send this part in here to another department that will do this. So just by talking to them, and then we ask some questions and they see the same drawing, it makes them visualize, and then everyone in the room, they see the problem. Right? It's usually the elephant in the room, but it's never in the room because it's always in their heads, right? And they either complain about it, but it's a super simple exercise that you do with the leaders of a company, and then suddenly whatever was bugging them, they can see, and the rest of the team see as well. And then it's not a solution that either the boss came up with, or John or Mary. It's the whole team sits together and they realize that, oh, we can actually fix this. The point of this whole story is to say that with this exercise, we brought clarity to these leaders, which is something that everyone likes to have clarity, but most importantly, on a daily on a daily basis, business owners and leaders, they're facing problems everywhere. And in several cases, it's just like fire everywhere, and they have to deal with each one of them in different ways and in half-baked ways, and they don't have the time to stop to think about it. So what we did with this event was to talk about AI and automations, but we took a step back first before touching any kind of tools or implementation of AI and automations. We did the manual labor of thinking through these workflows. And this was so much more powerful to the leaders because then they saw the problems. Because when you talk about AI, when you talk about these tools, it's overwhelming for people that are not too tech savvy. And it may be super exciting for those who want to try the technologies and the tools, and they get excited thinking that it will solve all their problems. But what solves the problem is to actually think about the problem before you start any kind of implementation. Because in the end of the day, now there are enough AI tools out there or automation strategies that they will solve the problems. It doesn't really matter. It's like some of them are better today, some will be better tomorrow, but roughly all of them, they have already elevated to a baseline where it's so much better than whatever manual process you're doing, right? Or that you've been doing for the past decade or so manually. But now any of these LLMs, for example, they can do a so much better job than the vast majority of people. But the clarity of the whole team seeing the same problem and figuring out, like, oh, you know what, like, this is not actually too difficult to solve because everyone is staring at the same problem and there is no assumptions, there is no confusion. There is more the curiosity about every single one of these steps. And that was feedback that we got from from many of these business owners. That was like, suddenly I can see the problems that I was trying to solve, but now it's so clear. And the funny fact is that I met some of these business owners a week or two after the event, and it was crystal clear the steps that they took already. They saw that the clarity made them take the necessary action to solve the problems. And some of them, the clarity that I realized that happened, it was about shifting the question that they had in their minds, like, do I need to hire? They thought they needed to hire, but by drawing, they realized, like, what am I actually hiring for? And one specific case was a CTO needed someone to handle bookkeeping plus accounting. And then the case was clearly you need to hire a unicorn. And one of the things that my partner and I would discuss was like, when you're hiring a unicorn, it means you're trying to hire 3 or 4 people into one person because they need to have different skills. But then I said, look, if this is the case, why don't we break it down the process, ignoring who's going to do what, but every single step, what needs to be done, and then you think about which kind of person, which kind of job title would perform each one of these steps. And that was it was mind blowing for that person. But then I noticed that happening with other business owners as well when we were discussing some of the hiring needs that they had. And there is this magic power of like drawing. Yeah, the example that I always say is that when people are trying to mock, if you don't get a concept, this is at least how I was raised, and I've heard it so many times. They look at you and they're like, do you want me to draw it? It's like, and then I say, yes, please draw it, because when you draw, whatever is in your mind, then I can see. And this is what happens, is it brings just clarity. And apart from these events that I had with my partner, we in the following week I had a mergers and acquisition event as well, where I was a speaker. And in that event, I've met several M&A specialists. And these are people that they have multiple businesses. And the most successful ones, they all were talking about AI. They were all talking about automations and how they were implementing those things inside their companies. They realized that there were even like sections that are really important to me that talk about marketing, design, branding, the whole creative department of a company. They were talking about how they were implementing that and how much the output of these departments or of these needs, they were kind of accelerating to a point that they were overwhelmed with the amount of work that was getting done in a really short period of time. And obviously, we talk about, when you're talking about any kind of company, we talk about costs. You have personnel, you have tools, usually software, you have the equipment, and you have the location. So if you have a building, if you have an office, these are some of the costs. And people tend to talk about cutting some roles, but nobody in that room, at least the big specialists, they were talking about cutting. They were talking about how can you leverage AI within your team, because if you have a really great team and you empower each one of these great people to use AI, their output, especially in the tasks that are nobody's excited to do, it will just be so much more. It will be so much more productive. And from the leaders' perspectives as well, it was mind-blowing the amount of operations that they've managed to fix or improve in a really short period of time. And a lot of them, they were also talking about this whole concept of the AI, the status of AI right now is just the worst that it can be, because they kept talking about like how much it's changed, especially in the past year. Now we're talking about last year, ChatGPT kind of like doing most of the heavy lifting, and then suddenly these shifts to Cloud Code, especially when you're talking about the OpenClaw showing up, and then Hermes now also playing a big part in the automations, and like treating AI as a 24 hours kind of employee, the agentic AI era that is becoming so much more empowering to those who can navigate this technology. So this was super recurring. And we obviously geeked out. So even after the event, I remember some nights we were discussing these until like, I don't know, midnight, and just discussing and exchanging experiences, what each one of us we were using, how we were using within special cases and general cases inside of our companies. And this was like really important for me, because they are all owners of different companies, different countries, different industries, and some of the solutions for their expertise in their industry, I managed to kind of like still like an artist, the concept of the solution and started implementing my own companies. At the same time, some of the things that I was doing, it worked for them as well. So the fact is that it's more than just discussing about AI. It's actually implementing and see what's working, and then you share your ideas and implementations with other people. This is what actually makes the businesses grow, and you as a business leader to push your companies forward. Now with all this knowledge, it's literally practical implementations and case studies of AI and automations and problems within companies, how the team pushes back when you're trying to implement these new technologies in a way that it's like from the top down versus my partner and I drawing the workflow and showing to everyone this is what the concept that I call AI before AI. So actual intelligence before artificial intelligence. And what does that actually mean when I talk about clarity is that no leader needs to convince their team that these changes are needed. When everyone sees the same problem, exactly the same problem, because it was drawn in front of them, that means that they collaborate, they ask questions about each one of them. Therefore, they convince themselves that changes are needed. And when you discuss in a team like that with so much clarity, the adoption of whatever tool you're going to pick, it will be so much easier. But what I see happening frequently when I even talk to the companies that are already implementing AI is that sometimes it's just like, oh, management wants us to implement this. They hire this consultancy and then it's thrown in there. Nobody likes to use it, or there is no communication between the tools. It's just like we have a budget, we've already spent it, and that's it. And in the end of the day, it didn't help that much. But they are like, we're using, yay, AI led company. So once you go back into the basics, and it's just drawing, right? And you don't have to be really good at drawing. You write something, make it a square around that step, and then draw an arrow. It's like anyone can do that. That's so powerful because then the whole team buys the solution. Right? Yes, some may have already tried different tools, and then there will always be some sort of friction when discussing the tools. But the fact is that it doesn't matter the tool; it matters that the solution will be there because everyone saw the problem, everyone had their saying, they asked their questions, and they saw problems that they had a they had a gut feel that there was something in there, but they couldn't put their finger on. But then suddenly, as a group, when they see, or someone like my partner and I, outside, we ask questions and we draw. Of course, we're going to have an unbiased position, and we're going to say, "Oh, there's a problem in here," and I can say that because I'm not from the team. I'm not going to hurt someone's feelings, like colleagues would say, or they wouldn't say that to the boss, right? So that was really important for us to handle, and I'm trying my best to spread this concept of actual intelligence before artificial intelligence. Lastly, I wanted to cover a shift in the podcast that wasn't clearly expressed until this point. When I started the podcast, I was more thinking about the hacks in my life that I was doing to increase productivity and everything that I was learning, applying, and then repeating, because there is something about applying that makes you learn better. And then my curiosity would go to different places, and I was just sharing my personal approach from a consultant perspective in the beginning, from an employee perspective. But then as my businesses started to grow and I started to have multiple businesses, I started to see that the same concept should be applied for leaders. And now what I'm doing is more, it's bringing conversations, these 30 plus business leaders that I discussed in the past month, they were all behind closed doors. And I think the value of having a podcast is getting some people that I really either want to know more about it, or people that I already know about them and I know about their businesses. I want to bring in here and then open the doors of this conversation to discuss something that it feels really lonely sometimes for you to be a business leader. And when I have these conversations in closed doors, I can see how much people open up. And what I've noticed is that I've been bringing these conversations inside the podcast, and the conversations are still happening. But then suddenly, anyone that stumbles on the episode, they will get the same value that I get. And for me, it is still learning from their perspective, sharing also the things that I've done and what I have applied. But for me, it's like every single episode I'm learning, and then I apply, and then I bring the other one. So it's always a constant cycle in there where I keep learning from them, and they keep learning from the conversations as well. And I'm also touching about the limiting beliefs and the changes that had to happen personally for each one of these leaders to get to the point where they are. Because again, we may read some books, but when you hear someone telling their own story, and we are humans, we are kind of, like we're wired up to listen to stories. This is when you get that feeling of like, I don't know what to do. And then suddenly someone that you've never met, and maybe they have a company that is way bigger than yours, and you realize that they struggle with something that you've already solved, that you could have given them a tip, and they're like, oh, great thing. Or you can realize that they think slightly different. And then through these conversations, what I try to do is to figure out what is the framework, their way of thinking that they use to take such a decision, or how they realize that they were stumbling in a limiting belief, and what was kind of the impact emotionally sometimes that they had, not only personally, but in their personal life, with their families and within their companies. So these are conversations that I always have, and I love to have them. And what I want is just to make sure that anyone that listens to this podcast, they can also share these experiences as well. I mentioned before, I treat these conversations as if when I listen to podcasts like this, I feel like I have the privilege to be sitting on a table observing how kind of the minds of other people that I respect, or people that I'm just meeting, that I'm pretty sure they know some bits way more than I do. It's a privilege to be in that place. So I hope that my podcast can provide such a feeling for you.